So, hi everyone. My name is Andrew Bauer. I use he, him, his pronouns. I attended school at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm a second-year business analyst at McKinsey & Company in Chicago. Miriam, want to take it away?
Absolutely. Hi all, I'm Miriam. I am a second-year associate at EY Parthenon, based out of the Boston office, soon to be based out of the New York office. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm very excited to be here with you all.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Trapito. I'm a third-year manager with Accenture based out of the New York office, and I'm part of our life sciences and supply chain practice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Lebehusen. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a second-year associate consultant at Bain & Company out of our Chicago office.
Hi everyone, this is Juan Gallardo. I use he, him, his pronouns. Second year manager with Deloitte from the New York office, part of our product strategy and lifecycle management practice.
Aisha are fantastic help and made it all possible. So definitely give her a shout out. We'll do a quick buzz through of what consulting is, but the emphasis of this is really supposed to be a panel discussion. So if you haven't already, please start populating questions into the chat on Passable. We'll be looking at that throughout, and we'll use that to drive our discussion for most of the session. And so with that, let's jump right in. So in this preview, hope to give a quick overview to give context about what consulting is. If you're a consultant, what might you do? And if you've heard the term problem solving, going a little bit deeper into what that means as a consultant. So high level, consultants are, people go to consultants with lots of different types of questions. Ultimately, they're some of the biggest priorities for CEOs or other key leaders. Now, these can range from very broad to more specific questions. Broad questions could be about market outlook, overall trends, things like agile working, AI, as well as trends such as COVID-19, how to respond to overarching issues. But just as important are also looking at answering specific questions. Examples of those might be, what are ways in which we can save money by using automation? Or we have an exciting drug in the pipeline. What is the best way to go to market with this product? Which segment should we target? And taking a step back and looking at the consulting landscape, there's lots of different types of firms that all play in different niches. And before going into some of the differences, I'd like to emphasize that at the end of the day, the focus on serving clients is really common across these. And so while it's easy to identify differences, there's ultimately a lot more in common than people sometimes think about. And so while you're going through this process, good to keep an open mind and cast a broad net about what might be a good fit for you. Some of the different types of firms include management and strategy firms, tech or IT firms, HR, and other more specialized firms. So quickly going to each of these, management and strategy firms are oftentimes generalist or will serve a wide variety of industries. And as a new analyst or associate, you could expect to get exposure to a wide variety of them. In terms of the questions they solve, oftentimes they can vary based off of the stage, from high-level ideation and strategizing to implementation or transformation. And then as we go towards the right, they become a bit more specialized and specific. So no surprise, technology consulting firms oftentimes are thinking about ways in which digital solutions can help their clients deliver better, more insightful, more impactful opportunities. Sometimes this can include using new business tools such as Salesforce, Oracle, SAP to really help their clients. HR firms look at talent, human capital, compensation, ways of working as a way to help clients. And then if you have an idea of a specific interest, such as finance or healthcare, a specialized smaller firm could also be a great fit. In terms of the role of the consultant, this will vary a lot, but at the end of the day, consultants are useful and brought in by clients because they provide an independent outside perspective. A big part of it is how do we get clients to think differently? And this can be on a wide variety of questions, whether it's trying to produce something more efficiently, mergers and acquisitions, but also a number of community impact topics, such as improving COVID response, thinking about high school graduation and job placement rates. Wide breadth, again, will vary based off of your specific company as well as the opportunities there. And so to tease these out a little bit further, gave a few examples of impactful work, whether it's disaster relief, cost reduction and rationalization, or COVID response. Different firms are doing different activities to really try to help whoever their client stakeholder is answer the most important questions. And so the content of all of these engagements might look very different, whether you're thinking about distributing emergency supplies, or understanding the operations and sale of steel. But at the end of the day, it's really driven by the client first mission. And that mission spans across industries and functions. And as a new consultant, you can expect to engage in a number of different types of activities that will help you get to this client impact. Over the course of your project, some of these may include partnering directly with clients, conducting both analyses of clients as well as external data, team problem solving. And once you have that wealth of information and developed a perspective, you can then compile a presentation or slide deck. And that oftentimes is one of the ways in which you'll communicate findings with the client. As for industry and functions, as I've said a few times, these will vary a lot based off of firm, but also by geography. So as you're getting to know firms a little bit and talking to people, it might be helpful to understand who does what and in which locations to make sure that you can be in a spot where you're maximizing for the work that's most interesting to you. Everyone has a different reason for wanting to be a consultant, and maybe you don't know, and that's something that you might understand or during O4U, or also decide you don't want to be a consultant, and that's totally fine too. Have a lot of reasons here. For me, what really stood out was the exposure to people, both on the firm as well as the client side. I really wanted to be surrounded by folks who were both brilliant, but also empathetic. And so I think that the opportunity to work with senior level clients and really smart people, but also people who really cared about me, was an important part of my criteria in deciding to go to consulting. Give a quick preview of what a sample day in the life could look like, but really need to emphasize how every day looks different. And so you can't expect it to look just like this one. You might get up a little earlier, go to bed a little bit later. One week might be easy, the next week might be hard. And so that flexibility and ability to go with the flow is really important. If you're to travel, oftentimes that involves going to the airport. And throughout the day, you'll notice there's lots of check-in meetings, opportunities to review, whether it's with a client or team, but also sometimes for bonding and connectivity. A consultant's job is to be a trusted advisor, and so important that you don't forget those human moments as well. And then quickly pivoting over to virtual, that's been a lot of our realities in the past several months. And the key things to highlight here is that if you're looking at the boxes, a lot of the tasks and day-to-day client engagement looks very similar in terms of activities, but the logistics are a little bit different. And so teams are trying to find ways to adapt. You know, examples of that might be blocking time in the evening to make sure that you have time to exercise or cook with a roommate who you might not see if you are traveling. And then finally, this is a question that I think you all should tease out during your time at O4U, because it's a really personal question and will look different for everyone. In terms of what it's like to be queer in consulting, I'd say that the big reason why consulting firms are oftentimes at the forefront is because diverse thinking is critical to our success. In order to provide the best answers to clients, it's necessary to have lots of different perspectives. And so that's become sort of a business case justification for why diversity and inclusion matters. I would also say that it's just the right thing to do. And we see more and more firms that are willing to do that. In terms of the support that you may expect to receive, and again, definitely something to ask about, this may be coaching during the recruiting process, as well as mentoring to facilitate retention, staffing and project opportunities if you begin to build out your network, as well as extracurricular involvement, ways in which to build a sense of belonging. And not to make it all about me, but just a little preview before we go into the panel, wanted to give an idea of what this might look like. I've been at McKinsey for just over a year now, and so this is what my experience has been so far, recognizing that everyone's experience looks different, and I have a lot of privileges as a white male. That being said, it actually all started at OUBC a couple of years ago. I was just chatting with Logan and Brandon about that, who are part of my OUBC experience, and was inspired to come out during the recruiting process and to ask partners who I was interviewing with, what does diversity and inclusion look like at your firm? What are ways that you've grown, but also opportunities to figure out what the culture and commitment to change look like. That being said, I was still a little nervous about fitting in the corporate culture, in particular interacting with clients, but got a lot of support both from GLAM, our LGBTQ plus group, as well as our leadership, which was incredibly important when serving clients in more rural locations. I'll say that GLAM has been supportive both in a personal as well as professional context, and have the unique opportunity to be on a team right now with GLAM managers, associates, and even a partner who've had lots of fun opportunities to both connect as well as think about my development at McKinsey. Can definitely dive more into that, but want to make sure that we're saving lots of time for your questions. So giving you a snapshot, but really encourage you to ask people about their stories. In addition to having people loving to talk about themselves, I think it also brings to life some of these more general themes that are then more applicable. When you hear the way people light up about folks, I think it speaks volumes about their culture. And so with that, we'll jump over to some of the questions. Know there's a lot on your agenda, and so try to answer the questions that are most relevant to you. Can be both about consulting, being queer in consulting, or anything else that's top of mind. We're going to do our best to go through the chat box and review them. So if we haven't seen something, don't be afraid to double post, but also know there are other opportunities to ask if we don't quite get there. So getting us kicked off, I alluded to the fact that every day is a little bit different. Brandon, wondering if you could talk to us about different stages or types of work that you may do over a project's duration.
Sure, happy to. So Andrew alluded to this, but I think of really three types of work on any given case. There's the client piece, there's the problem solving piece, and then there's the team piece. I think each case is going to spike differently across those three pieces, and even within the same case, your week to week could spike differently. But with that context, I can talk a little bit more tactically about what that could look like day to day within each of those pieces. On the problem solving piece, this could be anything from initially getting your data from clients and having to sift through that and clean it up, to doing expert interviews, to learn more about the industry or the client or the supply chain, anything like that, to building an Excel model that forecasts costs over the coming years. That's kind of that problem solving piece where you use that problem solving to keep informing your answer. Next, the client piece is going to be anything from creating slides to clearly articulate your answer, reviewing those internally with your own team and making tweaks. And then finally, presenting to the clients, whether you're just creating the content for those meetings, whether you have more of a support role in that meeting, or, as you progress in your career at these consulting firms, as you're actually leading those meetings yourself with clients. And then finally, that team piece is kind of underlaid across all parts of consulting. But one of the great things about consulting is getting really close to your team and having that sense of community within the team, because you're going to be working with them a lot. So whether that's, planning virtual meals with them during COVID, or, just little fun activities to kick off internal team meetings, but there's definitely that sense of team. And it's often kind of up to the more junior people to be those, we'll call them culture carriers on the team. So like I said, those are the different pieces of what you could be doing, but that varies day to day in terms of how you're allocating your time across each of them.
Great. Thanks for sharing, and love to see that we have a bunch of questions coming in. There's been a number of requests for the full panel to answer. I think we might not get everyone's input on all of the questions, but if you want to follow up with us, I'm sure we, as well as your mentors, would be great avenues if there's additional perspectives that you think would be helpful. So with that, wondering if, two folks maybe could ask or, provide perspective on what has been the most fulfilling part of your job as a consultant.
I can start with that one, Andrew, if you want. So for me, the most fulfilling part is it's building different relationships really fast. So as consultants, we have to really quickly pivot from one project to another, from one opportunity to another, from one client to another, and building relationships fast and relationships that are going to last because you're going to come back. It's been really fulfilling, right? It's not necessarily, I come from industry. I spent eight years in industry before joining consulting. So it's a very different model where you have in industry a long-term relationship with the same company. As consultants, we get to have meaningful, impactful relationships, and those change every 3-6 months, depending on the duration of projects and engagements. So that's been really fulfilling, knowing that you can do it, right? You can have lasting relationships, even if it's in the span of 3 or 6 months.
I can add my perspective on that too. I think the cool thing about consulting is that you're always working with the new stuff, right? Like when you think about, how you sell projects to clients, you're delivering what is new in the world and in the market that they need to pivot to, right? So you're always going to be working with the latest technologies. You're going to be working with the latest industry trends. And that's kind of the really cool thing in my perspective, where you get to see how you're working with your clients to help them adapt to what's changing in the world, right? So Andrew, I know you talked a little bit about COVID-19. We're actively working with clients on COVID-19, and especially from a supply chain perspective. So, so you really do get to work with clients on these really cutting edge aspects of their industry that, sometimes you don't get in other positions, right? That's our overall driving purpose is to sell the new stuff, right? And to help clients establish the new stuff. So.
Awesome. Thank you both. Moving right along, a big part of the consulting work is is client experience, and so definitely want to chat about that. But before we do, maybe in the background, folks can think about favorite client experiences or ways to build relationships. We have had a new joiner on the panel. Blake, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, sorry, y'all. I was having some major technology difficulties, and so I'm now logging in on my phone versus my laptop that's sitting right there. But that's okay. So, hi, y'all. My name is Blake Bergeron. I'm a second-year associate at BCG in their Dallas office. Pronouns he, him, his. And if we talked anything, I do a lot of work in our consumer practice area. If we talked about that, cool.
Awesome. Blake or someone else want to talk about a memorable client experience and or general tips they have on relationship building?
I can talk about that. So my current case is very heavy client involvement, and the part that actually I wanted to answer this as my answer to the prior question around what's sort of the most rewarding part of the job would definitely be that moment when you start to hand things over to the client and the client really starts to be the advocate for the change that you've been trying to convince them is the change that they need to make. So that would definitely be the most rewarding part for me. As we very recently had a set of meetings where we as BCG were not speaking. It was all entirely client led, and they were able to clearly articulate the vision and clearly articulate what was on the minds of their peers to address all of those problems. And so to me, that's A, just the most rewarding part of the job, B, some examples of like client interaction. And I think how we tips in terms of maintaining a good client relationship, I think it's a little harder now given a COVID setting of you're constantly just in meetings and you never have time to actually like relate with your client human to human. And so I think now it's been something we've all done as a team is sort of just take the first like 5 minutes of every meeting just to kind of just like continue to just chat about our lives and like poke fun at each other as we will, and try to sort of like kind of informally schedule time just to like actually talk with clients, not about content, but just about them and everyone's life.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Andrew, I can jump in with another thought there.
Yeah.
I do a lot of education strategy work, which is a wide range of clients, but a lot of higher education institutions with strategic needs, as well as ed tech companies, as well as private equity investors, but have spent a lot of time doing higher ed strategy. Had a client recently down in Virginia pre-COVID, and we would go down there and spend some time to kind of gauge the situation with stakeholders, shoot ideas around about the strategic path forward, look at data, et cetera. And a big component of that was actually just spending time with the client, meeting with tons of different people and just building those relationships and building consensus and just getting to know them. And it included, like, rather than just doing the meetings, which we would do, largely during the business day, we also went to like a school basketball game and went out to dinner at a local restaurant that was sort of a staple in their community, and just really took those relationships to the next level. And I found that to really be something that really facilitated the project throughout and helped us get closer and drive toward better answers, because there was just a better vibe and a better sense of community and trust among the team, our team members sort of coming in as outsiders, and then the school, the broader community, the broader stakeholders at play. So I would just say, like, be ready to lean in on your cases to both the social aspect and the work aspect, because both are really important in getting to some good results.
Yeah.
No,
when you're working with your clients, there's kind of an intuitive want to get to know you, right? And to get to know who you're working with. And a lot of times on especially long-term projects, you'll actually become part of their long-term team, essentially. And through that, you get some really rewarding experiences. And especially, as you grow at your company, and if you get to the level where you're owning a client relationship, you're going to have opportunities where you basically essentially become that client's right-hand person, right? You become, a friend to them in a sense. You're going to grab a beer with them and you're going to talk about what's giving them challenges during the day or how things are going. I've had an experience where I've actually traveled with a client in the Netherlands because she lived there. And I was coming for the first time, and she said, "I want to take you around," and we had a great time. So it just really depends on your client relationship. Obviously, every client relationship's a little different, right? Some are more professional in terms of just do the work and that's it. Others want to have that social connection. It just depends.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And sort of following up on that, we would love to hear folks' perspectives on how their queer identity has shaped their engagements, interactions with clients positively and negatively. I can take a stab at this and then love to hear about someone else. So one of the clients that I served was a industrial paper mill in rural Tennessee. And growing up in the Bay Area, going to a relatively liberal school, I've had the privilege of not having a lot of negative experiences in coming out. That's different for everyone, but that was not something that I was really prepared to handle. And so it was something that I talked openly about with the team leadership. I said, you know, happy to do this project. It will give me exposure to some pretty in-depth financial modeling, which is a skill that I'd like to build. But I want to flag that I am anxious about working with these clients. And to be clear, that is based off an assumption that I was making that may or may not have been fair, but it was top of mind going into the project. And so I got assurance from the team leadership that they would have my back, that they want me to be out in the team room with the clients and would see how things went. And funny enough, actually, one client one day asked why I had preferred pronouns in my email signature. And I said that pronouns are a good way to signal inclusivity. And as someone who's part of GLAM, our LGBTQ plus group, it's important to make space to have those conversations. And there was a pause. And then she said, you know, I think it's great that a company like McKinsey is at the forefront of topics like this. We're a paper mill, so we're not always ahead of the time, but good to see you leading by example here. And so this was a case where I was a little bit vulnerable and, you know, shared that with the clients, you know, didn't want to hold back. It was actually a really strong way for us to build trust, and previously had a bit of a rocky relationship with her, and she was fantastic. They're moving out. Any other memorable anecdotes that folks would like to share?
I can jump in here. Just last year, was serving a pharmaceutical company, and I got to go to Belgium and interact with a team that I was interacting with just virtually. And while being there for a couple of weeks, similar to what Logan just described, over the weekend I was traveling, and I met one of my client counterparts. And all of a sudden I'm meeting my client counterpart. He's out there with his boyfriend, and we started chatting. So it actually opened up a great relationship. Working with that person became so much easier because they weren't comfortable at work or whatever, and it just became very easy to work with that person. So being out at work and being out with my clients has normally paid off really well, and always being something that doesn't get in the way at all. If anything, it's a thing that gets acknowledged and moves on, and in the best of cases, it's something that actually works in our favor. So normally really good experiences.
I can share maybe a little bit of a different perspective, just how so I joined Accenture as an analyst. I progressed through the levels, and when I was an analyst, I was actually so I was out through Accenture. I was out to my project teams. I was very out in terms of joining the ERG and all of that. But to my earlier clients, I actually wasn't out. I was very concerned about if that was going to impact my relationship with them. I was working with more conservative individuals to probably how I had assessed, right? So I probably had some internal bias with that myself, but I was I was very cautious actually with clients early on, and it's actually very interesting. It's only the more recent clients where I've kind of at the point where I'm like, I'm out. Like if someone asks about my week, I'm going to tell them exactly what's going on. Because I just got tired, honestly, of covering that. I actually felt it actually did impede some of my relationships. I actually had a client who kind of talked around the fact, because I'm queer presenting, right? I dress probably in a more masculine manner, to the eye, and so my client actually kind of talked around the point, and I just avoided the conversation back in the day. But it actually turned out that she had a queer individual in her family, and she shared a lot about that individual, and it was kind of too bad I kind of missed out on developing that relationship, because I actually think I had a really strong ally there. And so, so I think it depends, obviously, it depends on every client. I've also seen experiences with individuals that are working in maybe more conservative industries, where that was a really more sensitive consideration, and they had to think very carefully about coming out to their clients and how that might impact how they were delivering their information. So it's a very case-by-case basis, and it's very much a personal decision. I've had very, very positive experiences being out at Accenture and all that. Client-wise, it was a consideration for me. So I think it's a very personal decision and what you are ready for.
Excellent.
I'll jump in quickly.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it. This is an
Super quick
question.
thought, building on that. I think it is a really personal journey. And I think the different steps in your journey toward how you want to present and engage with your identity in the workplace is something that's very much on you. I think back to when I attended this conference as a student, I definitely presented myself in a much more, I guess I would say, femme way than I am now, and in what I would consider to be like my comfort level or my identity now. I interviewed that way, got my intern offer, which ultimately turned into a full-time offer that way, but showed up to the internship, kind of like came into my own my junior year of college, presenting differently and presenting a little bit more stereotypically like a queer woman, I guess, or more masculine queer woman stereotypically. No one said anything to me. Everyone was super accepting. I think they realized like it was a little different than the person they met. But everyone was super, I never got any comments about it. And there have been points where I guess it's been a little harder to cover just because of my presentation. But I've never been forced to say anything, but have just grown in my comfort level of saying, oh, I'm going to dinner with a partner. Oh, I'm, my partner this or something like that, if that's the situation. And in client situations too, being more comfortable with those things. I do want to flag though, as others have mentioned, I think not to avoid certain industries, you shouldn't do that, but they're definitely, I want to acknowledge the privilege I've had in working in a really liberal industry, being education, whether it's institutions or education technology companies or anything on that side. It's largely, I haven't encountered to date, obviously it's not homogeneous, but people tend to be a little more liberal leaning, so I haven't faced some of the issues that some of my colleagues have faced in, say, industrials or other more conservative settings as well.
Yeah, no, good to hear the breadth, and I think this is a question that you should ask people, different firms, different industries, because everyone's responses are so different. Sort of going off this thread, maybe Brandon, you can help us with this one. Would love to get a flavor for the different activities or level of support that your firm's affinity group may provide. Could be in some of these types of settings or more broadly.
Yeah, happy to. So Bain's LGBTQ plus affinity group is called BGLAD. I can speak more to BGLAD's from the BGLAD perspective here, but I'm sure it's similar across firms. But there's different ways that upon joining the firm, you can get involved in BGLAD, and similarly how BGLAD then supports you. Some of those high-level pillars are there's the recruiting element, there's the professional development element, there's the kind of like community office engagement element, and then finally the social element. So I'll go just briefly into those. So recruiting element, Bain is sponsoring O4U. It very seriously approaches like diversity recruiting very seriously. And I attended O4U as a student, interacted with a lot of Bainies during that, had a positive impression of the firm because of that. And now, having joined the firm, I knew I wanted to get involved in this way to kind of give back. So a lot of ways to get involved with the recruiting side. The professional development side, right away you join the firm, you have this group of people that ranges across all tenures, and it's a really great chance to get to know senior leadership in the office that maybe would have been a little more difficult or less natural to kind of get to know. So, I set up kind of regular just check-ins with some of the senior BGLAD leadership in my office, which is a great way to kind of form those connections and maintain them. The community office engagement piece is cool. We do an annual fundraiser for a Chicago-based LGBTQ plus nonprofit during Pride Month each year. Involves the whole office. It ends with the losing teams getting pied in the face. Like it truly is office-wide, and it's really cool to see that office-wide support of it, even though obviously not everyone is in BGLAD themselves. So we do events like that. And then finally, the social side. We do a lot of like BGLAD-specific social events. Ice skating, attending a play together, happy hours, things like that. So it's also really cool to have, the more casual way to get to know other people in your office and not quite always talking about work, right? So those are like the four big areas that you can get involved in BGLAD and be supported by BGLAD. And like I said, I'll let others speak to their experience, but I would assume it's somewhat similar.
Yeah, I can speak for how things work at Deloitte. There's a similar to BGLAD. It's called Globe, and it is basically the same pillars, right? There's a social component to it, there's an office component to it, there's an outreach component to it, and there's a recruiting component to it. And you get involved in whatever areas you feel you want to contribute or you want to develop more. So I think the programs across firms are similar, and they all have the different elements, right? And you can get involved in those areas that you're more comfortable with. I'm not big into recruiting, but I am big into office events and internal outreach. So it depends on what you want to do, and I know that there's always there's always something to get more people involved, right? So that there's this desire to get more people in these kind of programs, and that's something that at every single firm or company that I've been in, it's always there, right? Making BGLAD or Global or whatever it's called a bigger initiative.
Yeah, excellent. It's all really about, what can you make time for, step up in, and rally folks around. Blake, maybe you want to jump in here, and then other folks can think about it too. What are some of the challenging parts of consulting? What is the most challenging aspect, perhaps? And what are steps that you take to overcome it? Sort of similar, how do you make consulting sustainable?
Sure, I can start on that. I think for me personally, and I guess the general disclaimer is obviously like the challenges vary by person. But for me personally, I think one of the hardest parts was just adjusting to the fact that there is naturally so much change in what we do, in terms of like you come in with a set idea of the project is supposed to accomplish this, and you initially have your like 12-week timeline where you're saying, cool, I think like each week we need to get like these 12 things done to get to where we need to be in the end. And for me, those first couple of weeks of the case are always the hardest, because it's where you sort of have to figure out, okay, was my initial guess on like what I need to do each week right? Or like, do I need to completely change the process for how we think we're going to get to the answer? And so it requires a lot of thought, a lot of like very detailed and meticulous planning, and a lot of just like being comfortable with things sort of just constantly changing at the moment and being like, cool, thought we were going to do that today, but I guess we're not going to. And so how I've dealt with that is I basically just have started doing it at the beginning of every case, just like spend my heavy part of my morning just thinking about that general piece of like, okay, like what's new from a process standpoint of how we're going to get to the answer, and then like appropriately socializing that with my teammates and my manager, and figuring out, okay, how do we continue to build the plane as we're flying it, so to speak. And in terms of the second piece of the question around like making consulting sustainable, for me, it's been honestly just like being honest about what I need during the week, whether it's like look, like point blank, I know this thing needed to get done today, but like human to human, I am exhausted, and like I'll tackle it in the morning, and this is the plan that will go on from now. And a lot of times it just requires like being that honest, and saying like, look, this is what I need. And a lot of people often are scared to bring that up, but in my experience, it's just like, you need to be honest. Otherwise, like your manager can't read your mind.
Absolutely. Anyone else have something tricky that they've learned to overcome?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that there's a really interesting piece of the job that is for me the most challenging part, but it's also just such an integral piece of the job that also makes it exciting, is that when clients come to us, they don't come to us with the tactical asks as it relates to the day-to-day work that you end up doing. They don't come to you like, I want a 500-person consumer survey related to this topic, and I want 20 calls, and I want a market model. They come with these really broad, high-level questions on, how do I better position myself in this market? What product should I be launching? What should the mix be? Like things of that nature. What market should I play in? What customer should I be targeting? And there's this translation that has to happen between those really big scope questions to the actual day-to-day work plan of how are we going to answer these questions? What is the best approach, whether it be primary research, secondary research, something else, to actually articulate those answers back to the client and then pull it all together to form comprehensive recommendations. And that just is inherently challenging. It's not a prescriptive job where it's really clear what you need to do. And like Blake said, you need to be ready to pivot on a dime to something else. If the questions change or if the answers you're getting from certain research isn't sufficient. And especially as I'm moving into my third year where I'm starting to take on more responsibilities as a manager and a workstream leader, and I have to take a more active role in translating those big questions into tactical next steps for the people that I'm overseeing and for the work streams I'm overseeing. When you start, you are also responsible for those things, but it definitely escalates, and there's a challenge as you get deeper into the job and more experienced of getting sharper at knowing the things that you need to do in order to get to the right answer and solving those problems. And then on the sustainability piece, I think it's really about communication. I would say communication is the single most key part of sustainability in this job. And there's a couple of key stakeholders that you'd want to communicate with. The first is staffing. So staffing is the sort of centralized organization that helps allocate the different resources and people to different teams. And for me, I sort of just realized literally this week that I had not had a break or stop since December. And I hadn't had any break between projects or time off and just had been going case to case to case. Reached out to my staffer and said, hey, I have some recruiting stuff and other commitments next week. Is there any way I can be on some lower key business development or something else? I think I'm starting to feel burned out. They super appreciate that. Just letting them know where you're at and what you need, and obviously don't complain all the time, and that's not even a complaint, but don't raise your hand all the time that you need a sec, but be honest about your capacity and what you've been doing, and they'll totally vibe with you. And then when you're on a specific team, just flag early to your case team leader certain things that you want to protect on a given month or week. Like I would say, I like to get dinner with my mom on Thursday nights. I'd like to protect from 6 to 8, and I'll get back online after if I need to finish something, or I'll get online in the morning. And people are usually really amenable to that as long as you communicate early and often.
Yeah, I think those are all super important. No, we're just approaching time, and so want to make sure that you're able to hop to your next event, get another LaCroix like me or bio break, but have flashed up our names, contact information in case you're interested in reaching out. Definitely recognize that, myself and others have a lot going on, but this was a really important conference for a lot of us, and so we might not be able to jump on the phone or answer questions tomorrow. I think I speak for the rest of the group that we are committed to helping and supporting our next generation of queer consultants. So with that, if there's nothing else to add, thank you so much for joining our session, and hope you have a great rest of the conference.